Well, good evening, folks. Great to have you along with us. Been a long day. It's about to get longer, but better. We trust. So before we get started, I'm going to introduce our moderator here in just a moment, and our moderator will introduce the participants. But we've got a few prizes to hand out, and at this point, we have we have names going along with the prize, and we've got for his scion, not a good reader, for mission. Okay, that's the name of the book. And it is for Zion. That's what's in my mind. Loudermilch. Zion, are you here? Need not be present to win. We'll send that to Zion. We've got The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy by Luke Saint, one of our participants. And the winner here is Beth Johnson. Beth Johnson is here. Thanks, Jeff. This next one should be somewhat easy. From the Ezra Institute, the Heidelberg Diary. Our winner is, I'm not sure where to find this guy, Jeff Saint. Don't go anywhere. And we have a t-shirt. Feels like a good quality t-shirt too. Hannah Ombre, are you here? Yeah. It almost feels like a sweatshirt. It's good quality. Yeah. All right, and then we will get Zion his book there eventually. And that's it, Jeff, thank you. Again, we're grateful that you're here with us. This is an important debate. It's so important that at least one of the political parties is running on this topic. The other political party seems to be running away from it. So you know it's pretty important. Should civil government regulate immigration? Our moderator tonight is Conrad Martin. Conrad lives in Lancaster County, PA, with his wife Abby and 5 children. He is a local businessman and armchair philosopher. Not so armchair. Conrad and Abby have published multiple books, including Under the Sun, a reader's edition of Ecclesiastes, Memorization Toolbox, tips for scripture memory, and they know what they're talking about, and Beyond Pink, Biblical Femininity and Solomon Says, which I think you've had access to that as well. So Conrad will, like I said, he will introduce our participants. One more thing about Conrad, I don't think you'll run into too many people like this. When I first got to know Conrad, I believe he was in his 20s, might have been before that, but one day we got talking, I think it was when he was in his 20s, we got talking, yakking a little bit. I said, Conrad, what do you do? What do you do for fun? What do you do to relax? True story. He said, well, I like to write a theological paper to relax. So, well, welcome to the leper colony. I think you're going to be all by yourself with this one. But we're grateful to have him. He's a perfect person to moderate this debate. So at this point, Conrad, we'll turn it over to you, and thank you.
Welcome to tonight's debate. Thank you, Joel, for that introduction. About Tuesday, I wasn't actually sure if I could moderate. I lost my voice, and one of my coworkers called me up, and all I was able to do was croak indistinctly. So, but a bunch of tea and apple cider vinegar, and here we are. Just, you might not get the velvety tones that you were hoping for, but we'll take it from there. The topic, as Joel already said, is a hot button issue in this presidential cycle. The political parties taking radically different perspectives on it, and yet they are united in an utter disregard for what Scripture has to say on this topic. I hope that is what we'll try to get into tonight. What has God said regarding how people move around? The thesis for tonight's debate: should the civil government regulate immigration? In the affirmative, I've got Alan Maricle, which, Alan, I'm sure you've noticed this, but your last name, like if you would just flip those 2 letters, it would be Maricle. Have you thought about how much more satisfying that would be?
Blame my parents.
I mean, you know you can change it. You can get it changed.
I'm just lazy.
Okay, well, you know what they say, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So, Alan is a longtime abolitionist and an author of much of the content of the various early abolitionist websites. He has been regularly engaging the culture of death for 13 years on the street, at the abortuary, the IVF dungeon, on the sidewalks, in front of government schools, in the local GOP politics, and inside and outside disobedient local churches. He is overjoyed to be married to Aubrey with 3 children on earth and 3 with the Lord. Let's give a hand of applause for Alan. Thanks for coming out. In the negative, we have Luke Saint, raised in a homeschool environment by parents with a Reconstructionist vision. Luke claims Christian Reconstruction as the mindset and mission of his faith. He is the author of The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy and currently serves as the president of the board for Future of Christendom. Let's give a round of applause for Luke. Thanks for coming out. The format, which you can find in your program, is first of all, we'll have opening statements, 15 minutes each, followed by 5-minute rebuttals. We'll then move into cross-examination, 10-minute alternating segments for a total of 40 minutes. 5-minute closing statements after that, and then some audience questions. As you can see, that is a very short format debate. So each presenter needs as much time as he can get. We'll ask you to just hold all applause and booing until the end, along with any tomatoes or cabbages that you may have brought with you. Just keep it for the end. Oh, I also want to mention, if you have any gifts for either speaker, you can just give those to me and I'll. So we will have a break in the middle of cross-examination, a 5-minute break after the first 2 10-minute segments. We ask that you have your questions in by that time. You'll find note cards on your table, I believe. Just write your question on there. Put the name of the person you're asking it to, or write both at the top if it's for both of them. And then you can put them in the box at the back, or it's a white bin that's Chris is holding up back there. So just drop them in there. Please try to have them in there by the break, and then we'll get those asked. You have to write legibly. I'm telling you right now, I have a very hard time reading handwriting. If you write in cursive, I'm probably not going to ask your question. So make it legible. With that introduction, we'll go into Alan. Will you come up and give your opening statement?
Okay, we'll start now. First off, I'd like to say glory to the Lord Jesus Christ, the King of the universe, who has all authority to tell us what to do and what not to do. Is the audio okay? All right. And the Lord has graciously seen fit to allow all of us to gather here for this joyful time of communion, fellowship, and edification. So thank you to all the organizers of this conference as well. Thank you to Brother Luke for agreeing to engage this topic with me. And may the Lamb of God receive the reward due him. My position on this topic is identical or nearly identical to that expressed by our esteemed brother Matt Truella, present with us this weekend, from his sermon in 2017 on this topic, and I quote, "The magistrates of any nation have the right and the duty to have those who want to live in their nation assimilate to their law and custom. To do otherwise is asinine and dangerous," end quote. The civil government should indeed regulate immigration. For purposes of full disclosure, I doubt Brother Luke and I disagree very much on almost any political question, probably not very much even on this question. Think of all the breathless headline jockeying of the past few years about immigration. That clutter directs the attention of virtually everyone in the normie churches and the compromised GOP toward that which is a sideshow. What's the sideshow? The quantity of people crossing the borders. They do that so nobody will ask far more important questions, like, is our nation under God's judgment for 80 million dead babies and public perversion parades? Or questions like, why are these immigrants even coming? Ask that kind of question, and then you have to grapple with answers like this one. Well, the Western spy and military apparatus keeps destabilizing other nations, thus creating terrible conditions that people feel they must try to escape. Or the answer, if you go to the West, you get free money from the nanny state. Or this answer, it benefits the PDF files, let the listener understand, who are in charge of the West to, like John said earlier, deracinate those people and then cull their children for slaves and then to disappear them. That's why. So first of all, what's the big answer to the immigration problem? Expose darkness, establish justice, destroy the tax slavery structure, and then one might suggest you're around 80% of the way there, maybe more. But let us here parse carefully the thesis statement. During a brief debate like this, there's little time to delve deeply into what one might mean by government, or exactly what kind of regulations one might have in mind. I don't have all the answers about all of that, of what this restriction would look like necessarily, but remember this. I am affirming that the civil government should regulate abortion, too much abolition, regulate immigration, and he is denying. If it is established that even a tiny bit of regulation is legitimate and wise, then the debate is decided. So, now to the arguments. Exodus chapter 23, let's start there. Verse 23 says, "For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them." Skip down to verse 27. "I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion all the people among whom you come, and I will make your enemies turn their backs to you. I will send hornets ahead of you so that they will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites before you. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, that the land may not become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. I will drive them out before you little by little until you become fruitful and take possession of the land. I will fix your boundary from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the river Euphrates. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you will drive them out before you." Skip to verse 33. "They shall not live in your land because they will make you sin against me, for if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you." The word of the Lord. Let's use this passage as something of an extreme example. God first explicitly commanded the Israelites under Moses and Joshua to drive the Hittites, for example, out of the promised land, since after all the land had vomited them out, like Leviticus 18 says, right? Now imagine this. Would God have objected if all the Hittites, once they're driven out, if they had turned right around once they set one foot outside the border, and then they just walked back in? One step over the border, declare, "Hey, we come in peace, man." And there you go. There's no restriction on immigration, right? Can they just enter in? Imagine if all these Hittites who had just done this about-face were military-aged men. But let's say they're not outwardly aggressive. Imagine they're not carrying weapons. Suppose they claim to be refugees or asylum seekers. They're just wanting to do the jobs that Israelites don't want to do. And imagine that God were consulted about this. Would God have agreed, well, it's peacetime, so you shouldn't interfere with the free movement of people? That's the idea. Now, if you think that is implausible, then the debate thesis is affirmed. The civil government should restrict, at least sometimes and under some circumstances, immigration. Now, in Israel under Moses and Joshua, the law of God was supposed to reign supreme in society. Yet completely and totally unrestricted free movement of people is not consistent even with that nation, let alone with modern nations. What other relevant facts do we see in the law of God? We see God deliberately creating disparate languages at Babel and setting boundaries of people in Deuteronomy 32. We see the law of God explicitly treat foreigners differently than Israelites in Exodus 12 and 23, Leviticus 25, and Deuteronomy 14 and 17. And we see faithful Israelites treating foreigners differently in Ezra chapter 10 and Nehemiah chapter 13. Strikingly, Leviticus 25 gives Israelites permission to buy slaves from surrounding nations who would be slaves for life, whereas any Israelite indentured to another Israelite was to be offered freedom at Jubilee. We see God warn the Israelites that dominance by foreigners will be a judgment on Israel in Deuteronomy 28, fulfilled in Lamentations chapter 5. Crucially, we also see the law of God interpreted and applied in real time through the history books in the Old Testament. For example, Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 11, he kept lists of foreigners. How did he do that, absent some kind of immigration restriction mechanism? I'd like to know. Now let's turn to a very important passage along those lines, Ezra and Nehemiah. Starting with Ezra chapter 4. The Hebrews reject the proposition that foreigners help them to rebuild the temple, saying they have nothing in common with us. The foreigners respond with strong opposition, and this opposition continues until the Persian king commands the work be continued. So the foreign enemies cease their open opposition and they bide their time. Finally, in Ezra chapters 9 and 10, the separation between Hebrews and foreigners is stressed to such an extent that chapter 10 carries the command, quote, "Now therefore make confession to the Lord God of your fathers and do his will, and separate yourselves from the peoples of the land and from the foreign wives," end quote. Note in Nehemiah chapter 2 that the main opposition to building Jerusalem's walls comes from an Ammonite, a Horonite, and an Arab. Nehemiah responds with a prayer that Sanballat and Tobiah, the enemies, be forcefully emigrated out of the country, which is interesting. In chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, it says, Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance in it. Then verse 11 of chapter 4, this is very important. It says, quote, and our enemies said, they will not know or see until we come among them and kill them and stop the work, end quote. This is not an obvious armed invasion. This is not a formal declaration of war. This is not a frontal assault with uniforms and military standards. Why do I mention that? Because this is peacetime. And then the enemies of the people are preparing a secret infiltration with a time-delayed plot to break out in violence once they're successfully inserted with sufficient numbers into the objective. So I can hear the voices now, like, we're refugees, we're asylum seekers, we need jobs. It's okay, guys, we're here in peace. We just want to march 100,000 military-aged males into your nation, just because. Remember, we come in peace. Is it always plausible? If it's not always believable, then the debate thesis is affirmed, and the civil government should sometimes restrict immigration. Now, what was Nehemiah's response to discovering this threat? He closed the border, not the wall. That wasn't built yet. They were building the wall. He closed the border with a show of force. He controlled access to the city, keeping the nationals in and keeping the foreigners out. In chapter 7, verse 5, Nehemiah decides to create a registry of all nationals, setting apart the foreigners. In 13, verse 3, they go even farther and exclude all foreigners from Israel. And then he curses those who intermarried with foreigners. Okay, so I got a question. Are we moderns? Are we better at interpreting and applying the law of God than these people that we've just mentioned, Ezra, Nehemiah, Solomon, etc.? Nehemiah and Ezra knew that they were responsible to prevent spies, saboteurs, and assassins from infiltrating their people secretly. Does it sound like they thought civil government should never restrict immigration, ever? Here's another reason why this is important. Consider Leviticus 19 and 23 and Deuteronomy 24. God's directives not to shake one's olive trees twice or to glean all the way to the edges of the field, etc. Or Deuteronomy 14, the third year tithe. These were explicitly to be provisions for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. How much that's actually going to be is not very much necessarily, because it's a small portion of each harvest. It's just 3%, right? It's not really that much. It's the edges, the leftovers. But what happens when the relatively small population of native widows have to compete with a bunch of often aggressive, not always, but often aggressive military-aged males from another tribe? Are the widows not by far the most likely to be shortchanged and bullied away by the jihadi refugee or by the 30-year-old migrant worker who may not be a saboteur, but he needs to eat too? Let's put it in terms of some modern application. Say a quantity of foreigners equivalent to or greater than the native population of a given community moves in all at once. No immigration restrictions, remember? So I have some questions about that scenario. Housing. Where will these people live now that double the population is in town almost overnight? Food supply. What are they going to eat? Plumbing. Where will they do their, business? Culture. What happens when they don't, for example, drive their cars carefully like what's happening in Springfield, or respect private property laws, or speak any of the local language at all? Remember, in this scenario, which is not implausible, they outnumber the natives in our plausible unrestricted immigration scenario. Might violence, vandalism, and sexual assault increase drastically, since sinful people tend to discriminate against those who are outside their tribe? We've seen plenty of that in the past decade in the modern West, and throughout human history, as a matter of fact. And what if they retain their national identity, but secretly? But then over time, they grow to outnumber the native population, and then they come to dominate the government, and then they institute by democratic processes more and more socialism, so as to plunder the nation by lawfare and reintroduce the nanny state for their own benefit. It is absolutely legitimate to prepare against easily foreseen potential problems. Proverbs chapter 22 and 27 says this: "The prudent sees the evil and hides himself, but the naive go on and are punished for it." Remember what we read in Exodus chapter 23. It says, quote, "They shall not live in your land." Why? "Because they will make you sin against me," end quote. God here is explaining via what is known as a counterfactual what would otherwise happen if the precaution is not taken, if the command is not followed. It's the same thing Nehemiah did, and there are multiple other biblical examples of this kind of warning. God set boundaries in place, confused languages and created tribes, and separated peoples from one another. Sinful people often find a wonderful excuse to sin against and oppress others in the differences between people groups. That's their excuse. That's probably why the pamphlet Principles of Communism by Friedrich Engels in 1847 says, quote, "What will be the attitude of communism to existing nationalities? The nationalities of the peoples associating themselves in accordance with the principle of community will be compelled to mingle with each other as a result of this association, and thereby to dissolve themselves," end quote. That's probably why the tyrannical Assyrians, employed by God as a rod of judgment against Israel, forcefully resettled a whole bunch of disparate people groups into the land they'd just conquered, 2 Kings chapter 17, which led later to the emergence of the Samaritan people group. And we all know how well the Samaritans got along with Jews around the time of Jesus, don't we? I don't see how even some future post-mill majority Christian nation, which we all expect to happen, or most of us, I'm sure, that walks in the law of God would be immune to these same dangers posed by unrestricted immigration. Sure, violent foreign pagans might encounter the gospel in your Christian nation, maybe even be born again, maybe a lot of them, but is that a good reason to allow them all access just because they want to? Just because of a vague but inconsistent notion of the right of freedom of movement? Far better, I think, to restrict immigration and send out missionaries. Now, let's talk right now and right here. This nation, if you can even call it that, has plenty of problems already. Do you want more pagan religion practiced openly? More division? More numerous and fractured groups with accompanying racism and intertribal hatred? Do you want more sex trafficking? Do you want more abuses of native-born citizens? Growing risk of civil war between ever-growing numbers of tribes with growing populations? You may not want it, but that is what we are observably getting. Dominance by foreigners, judgment. May the people of the USA repent speedily and find grace in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen and thank you.
Lord.
Thanks, Alan. Enjoyed it very much. Thanks for coming out here to do this debate. Thanks, Conrad, for moderating. And thank you, everyone here, for coming out to this debate and listening to us talk about this issue. I'm going to address the thesis in a negative light. Is it the responsibility of the civil government to regulate immigration? I'm going to be answering, no, it's not their responsibility, and nor is it their duty, nor is it their right to regulate immigration. I'm going to be making some points. I'm going to first talk about the purpose of man, then I'm going to talk about the purpose of government, and then I'm going to talk about the solution to the immigration problems that we're talking about, that Alan is talking about and that I will talk about. But understanding the purpose of man that God has given us in this life, God has said, go into all the world and take dominion, cover the earth. That requires movement of people. It is our purpose twice, 3 times arguably, in the Bible we are told to go into all the earth. Never once are we told to justify our intentions, our actions, or our movement to the civil magistrate anywhere in God's law. That's never told us. We are never required, when someone comes up to you and say, hey, what are you doing here, to give an answer. The right to remain silent is a right that is given to us by the scriptures, and even when the civil magistrate says, why are you coming to this country, we have no biblical responsibility to give an answer. The purpose of man is dominion. Now, as I'm arguing for this, I don't want to demonstrate to you something that I think people, I want to demonstrate to you a category of thinking that I believe is biblical. When I ask you, is your front door always open or is your front door always closed? I hope you recoil back and say, that's not how front doors work. So I'm not saying that we should have always open borders or always closed borders. What I'm calling for is a biblical understanding of the border, just like you don't think about your front door as being always open or always closed, and it's got to be either one. So the two greatest commandments are love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, I'm gonna run this by you real quick. I love the Lord with all my heart, soul, and mind, and I love my neighbor as myself, and now I'm gonna go commit adultery. Does that work? No, not really. I love the Lord with all my heart, soul, and mind, and I love my neighbor as myself. Now I'm gonna blaspheme. Okay, that doesn't jive. How about this one? I love the Lord with all my heart, soul, and mind, and I love my neighbor as myself, and now I'm gonna go live in Zimbabwe. Am I breaking any law? Am I doing anything wrong? The purpose of the civil government is to avenge. That's it. You cannot avenge someone looking to come into your country. Who are you avenging? You restrict their movement and say, no, you can't come in here. And they say, okay, I'm coming in there anyway. And then you pull out a gun and say, well, if you come in here, I'm going to shoot you. And then they say, well, I'm coming anyway. Now you're killing people just because they want to come into your nation. Who are you avenging? Are you avenging anyone? Are you avenging the state? I hope not. So I'm going to give you 3 points here. It's going to be the same point, but I want you to look at it from 3 different perspectives. The government must only punish those who do wrong. That's point number 1. And the point number 2 is the government must only punish those who do wrong. And point number 3 is the government must only punish those who do wrong. The first one, the government must only punish those who do wrong. They are an avenger, not a preventer. They're not here to protect us. Protection is a byproduct of the establishment of justice in the land. You can get all the protection you want, but if you don't get justice between you and your neighbor, it's irrelevant. Their job is to give you justice, as in Romans 13, they are an avenger on him who practices evil. Going into another country and then skipping around a border where they ask you questions about why you're here is not wrong. So you cannot be avenged and you cannot be punished for that. The government's responsibility is to punish those who do evil. It's not evil to not report to the statist border patrol. It's not evil. You've not committed anything wrong. The government, point number 2, the government must only punish those who do wrong, and that is they must enforce extant biblical law. That's their responsibility. Not to make new law, not to make a judgment on, well, we have too many people here, now we're going to cut it off. America, for the first 100 years, had little to no immigration law. Almost none. 1882 was basically when we first started doing it. But from 1789 to 1882, we really didn't have any immigration law. And that's right. That's good. That they were more in line with their biblical responsibility to enforce God's law and not man's law. But God never tells the government, the civil magistrate, to go check on, make sure people coming in here are good little boys and make them swear to be a good boy. And number 3, the government must only punish those who do wrong. They must not sacrifice justice for safety. Your responsibility is to punish the evildoer, not to say, well, I'm going to put that on hold for now because I'm really scared about all the people who are in here. And I'm going to start asking people questions like, why are you here and what are you doing here? Not your responsibility. You must avenge those who do evil. Desiring to come to live in another country is never evil. I want to talk about the solution real quick. Instead of pushing for stated solutions, we should be pushing our government towards biblical law. Every time that you argue for, I want this solution to deal with the immigrants you're talking about tax money, you're talking about time, you're talking about manpower, you are talking about resources. It is a waste of time to argue for stated solutions when we could be using that time to argue for biblical solutions. Your status Band-Aid, whatever the problem is just going to make things worse. Oh, we're not ready for it. We're not ready for it. We're not ready for that. Yeah, I heard that one before. We're not ready to abolish abortion. I'm not saying Alan's saying that. I don't want to put that on him, but this is an argument I hear a lot. Oh, we're not ready for biblical law yet. Just a little bit. Wait a little bit longer. Here's your white robe and your scroll. Wait a little bit longer. That is not the purpose of the government. We should be arguing for biblical solutions, not wasting any time or any breath on arguing for, let's round up all the immigrants that we don't like. That talking about manpower and a waste of time, waste of resources. The innocent will be punished with the guilty, and we don't need that. So we're wasting our time. Whenever we open our mouth to speak about these problems, our responsibility is not to say, well, God's law isn't really practical right now, so let's grab everyone who hasn't sworn to be a good boy when they're in the United States. We are supposed to say, hey, here's the problem, thus saith the Lord. Some questions I have for this situation. We need to be prepared long term for this problem. What happens when personal flight is developed by these immigrants? They're all coming in here with cell phones. Some cell phones better than mine. Some of them are paying thousands and thousands of dollars. I know people personally have paid upwards of $30,000 to be taken into the United States to the Coyote, still paying him off. What happens when they develop personal flight and our walls and our questions and our immigration border doesn't mean anything anymore? And they just appear here. Oh, more man-made law. That's not the solution. We've got to think long-term about this. God's law, as it stands, is the only one that transcends technology. And they will develop technology to surpass whatever sort of borders or whatever. Are you familiar with the war on drugs? That's kept a lot of drugs out of the country. We're never going to keep the immigrants out. Instead of arguing for let's keep the bacteria away from our bodies, how about we talk about strengthening the immune system that God has given us so that when we encounter the bacteria, inevitably, we're ready to deal with it. But when we're talking about keeping people out, all I hear is, well, we should keep bacteria out of our body because it could harm us. It's going to get in there, and you got to be ready for it when it happens. And God's law is the only system, it's the only law that takes that into account. How did Israel have 80 years of peace with no immigration policy? 80 years of peace in the book of Judges. And that was right after they got off a 40-year stretch. And then after that 80-year stretch, they got 40, and then they had 40 more. No one at the border asking them, hey, are you going to be a good boy? You promise to abide by the laws? My sign right here. No, but none of that. Ruth and Naomi did not have to go report themselves when they decided they found out food was back in Israel. They never had to report to anyone to say, hey, I'm back here. And she was a Moabitess. No one to report to. The solution to these problems is enforcing extant biblical law. Why do we have an immigration problem? I'll tell you why. It's because idolatry is protected and celebrated in this country. No matter what wall or system you put up to regulate immigrants, if you protect idolatry, it's all a wash. If you protect idolatry and celebrate blasphemy, it does not matter what kind of immigration policy you set up. The purpose of the government is to punish those who do evil, idolaters, blasphemers. That's why, because when the immigrants come here, they say, I can protect it, especially talking about the jihadists. They are protected in their jihadism when they come here by the laws that we have. We are not punishing idolatry, so when that's an open invitation for destruction by the immigrants. Now, you can set up what kind of wall you want. You can set up any policy you want, but it's all a wash unless you punish idolatry and enforce God's law, which includes the punishment of idolatry and blasphemy. The curse of the foreigner ruling over us is because of idolatry. In Deuteronomy 28, it says this, verse 32 through 35. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people while your eyes look on, and you fail with longing for them all day, but you shall be helpless. A nation that you have not known shall eat up the fruit of your ground and all of your labors, and you shall be only oppressed and crushed continually. Sounds familiar. And the verse 43 from 44, the sojourner who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall come down lower and lower. He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. Why? Why is this happening? It's not happening because you left a hole in your border wall. It's not happening because you missed some people when they came in and you forgot to ask them, do you swear to be a good boy while you're here and mind your P's and Q's? That passage of cursing begins with this: but if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God and be careful to do all the commandments and the statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. The sojourner, the immigrant, will rule over you if you do not enforce God's law. That's the promise in Deuteronomy. We have immigration problems because we've decided we're nicer than God. Idolatry, can't punish that. It's a little mean, isn't it? What's idolatry anyway? Who's going to be in charge of that? It's just too complicated. Can't do that. And now we have problems with immigrants because they are protected in their idolatry. Their idolatry is celebrated and welcomed institutionally in this country because of our laws. But if it was the other way around, and people who are coming to this nation knew, okay, I can come, but my idolatry and my blasphemy and my sexual perversion is not welcome, it doesn't really sound like the place for me. Verse 10 of Deuteronomy 28. And all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you if you enforce God's law. That sounds like a pretty good immigration policy to me. Again, how did they have 80 years? I mean, the way people talk about this, they had 80 years uninterrupted peace, no wall, no immigration policy. Didn't have to report to anyone. The weightier matters of the law are justice, mercy, and faithfulness. That's the purpose of God's law. If you sacrifice these things, it does not matter what you want to accomplish, you're not going to get the blessings of God, especially when it relates to the sojourner and the immigrant. God has given us his law to establish justice, mercy, and faithfulness in the land. This is also tied to God's civil structure. In Exodus 18, the promise of Jethro is, then all these people will go their way in peace, and those who desire peace, this is not Jethro talking, this is me talking, those who desire peace at the expense of justice will get neither, and that's what a lot of this debate is about. If we do not enforce God's justice, we will not get peace. Thank you.
Rebuttals, starting with Alan.
Thank you, Brother Luke, for that spirited and very godly and biblical talk. Appreciate that very much, and thank you all again for your attention. May the Lord Jesus Christ be honored and exalted in everything that we do. We have a lot of agreement, Luke and I. I just agree so much with so much that he said, probably almost everything. Things like, I'm just scribbling down notes here. Desiring to live in another country is, probably not going to be evil, but there's something to come back to on that. I'm definitely not necessarily arguing for mass deportations or anything like that. How did Israel have years of peace? Obedience. One wonders if they had any threats corresponding. That's a question. I certainly agree. Why has the USA become, why does the USA have this immigration problem? Well, it's because the USA hates the law of God. So obviously, it is a judgment, as we both agree. We don't punish idolatry, so they come, absolutely. And I agree also that the state is not in a position to, kind of be like a protector or preventer. However, there might be some caveats, so we may have to adjust our language a little bit to think about that. But let's think about this. I'm not trying to criticize any immigrant necessarily, any person who wants to immigrate to another country. I'm not trying to say that that's not something that they should do. I'm saying that the government, the civil government, like the immigrant doesn't necessarily have to justify it. But think about this. How would you put in some restrictions if you decided that it's legitimate and wise to restrict people coming into your country? You would put people, some kind of protective measure at the border where people cross through. And then, when people come in, you would ask them questions to see, if you want them, if they conform to the restrictions or whatever. Now, I'm not saying, shoot them. You don't have to escalate so quickly in such a scenario, but just think it through what it could look like realistically. The agent, let's say, or whoever is designated to, guard the border or whatever, is asking the person, why are you coming in? And the person doesn't want to answer, okay. And then the person tries to keep moving. Well, That's freedom of movement. But the agent also has freedom of movement. I can use agent kind of loosely here. He gets to have freedom of movement as well, to block the advance. He has freedom of movement to move laterally. Well, so do I. Okay, now what's he going to do? Is he going to attack me? Well, assaulting somebody who's innocent of any crime is a violation of the law of God. So there's the escalation. If the immigrant wants to, defy the reasonable expectations of that nation, okay. So I do not believe that government should be making new law. I do think, however, that in my opening statement I was able to show that in the law of God there are contained provisions that you then work at. And everybody does this with every kind of biblical law. Whenever somebody who's concerned with the law of God wants to apply it to modern society, they try to adapt it to a modern context. That's just what you have to do, because like the parapet law or the tithe law, there's all these different things. People don't mostly harvest things anymore. So like the harvest becomes applicable to your job, and so I get paid in dollars, right? So what's the tithe look like for me? So you have to apply the law of God to the modern situation without making new laws, that's for sure. We agree on that. But I'd like to ask you about this. Desiring to live in another country is never evil? Really? Never? You can't think of one single instance ever in human history when somebody has entered another country with evil intentions mixed in along with their desire to maybe not live in the country, but be in the country, like a saboteur or an assassin? Never? And you don't think that there's ever any reason to try to guard against that? He suggests, as long as you swear to be a good boy. Well, I don't know about swearing to be a good boy, but I would like to know whether, let's talk about it, like 100,000 people show up at your border, military-aged men, all, with bulging abs and bulging biceps and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, hey man, we come in peace, we're refugees. You're like, where are you from? They're like, we're not gonna tell you. Okay, is there war in your country? What brought you here? We'd like to come in, please. Oh, come right in, please. You guys look like you know your way around some sharpened sticks and machine guns. Come right in, it'll be fine. He talks about, the government's role as, avenging evil. True, but I think we've seen, that was the question I was asking before. Nehemiah and Ezra and Solomon, for example, those people, did they have any reason to believe that the law of God, allowed them to do that, and like there was provision in the law of God for that? Were they interpreting the law of God in a way that, maybe we are not seeing today? And so do we have reason to think that they were disobedient to the law of God in such a proper thing? The last thing I'd like to say is, Brother Luke compared the question to abortion. I would like to suggest it's not analogous. The preborn has the right to live, but we haven't seen a demonstration of the right to move literally anywhere on the part of any given human being. So I'd like to ask whether that exists. And that's all of my time. Thank you very much. May the Lord Jesus Christ receive the reward due him. Amen.
I just want to say real quick that I'm so glad that Alan is being so nice. If you've ever interacted with Alan on Facebook, he does not come across this nice, so I'm very pleased. Thank you, Alan, very much. Okay, so talking about, I'm going to disagree. Is he here? Is Matt Truella here? Matt, I'm going to disagree with you. I do not think it's the right and the duty or the responsibility of the magistrate to regulate who comes into this nation. God's law, as it stands, is an automatic regulating machine. The establishment of justice and righteousness in the nation regulates who comes in and who stays automatically. Now, regarding like say 100,000 people coming up to your border and saying, "Can we come in?" Oh yeah, of course you come in. What I'm trying to do is to get us to think about this in a biblical sense. In a biblical society, you would not have an army trying to report to any sort of border. They would just fly in on JetBlue, on different flights, or they would drive in. When I go to Maryland, I don't need to walk. And if I take all of you with me, guess what we're taking? We're taking a bus, because I have nobody to report to. In Israel, there was no choke area, concentration zone, that was set up to interview people when they come in, even armies. So we've got to get rid of this category of thinking, well, what if there's a huge mob of people wanting to get in? There's not going to be a mob of people wanting to get in, because they'll just fly in or drive in. There's no one to report to. Because in a biblical society, if I desire to live in another country, all I have to do is get in touch with somebody who's selling land, buy the land from them, and then just fly in. Now, I'm not saying that we'll never get invaded and we'll never have an army at our gates or trying to get in and destroy us. That's definitely going to happen. It happened with Israel, it happened with any godly society. But if you look at Esther chapter 9, that's what they tried to do to the Jews. They tried to do just that. They tried to mingle with them and then suddenly attack them. But the Jews were tipped off first, and they turned things back around on them. Even though they were completely saturated by the foreigners who were among them, the Jews still had the ability to fight them off. A border wall is not going to keep us safe from an army. It's only God's law that can do that, and the establishment of justice and righteousness. Righteousness exalts a nation. Now, when he brings up his examples, which are very good examples of possible immigration ideas, separation from the assembly is not expulsion from the country. Now, God said there are certain people that are not allowed in the assembly, but if you look at the example of Nehemiah, when he kicks all the foreigners out of Jerusalem, he says to the Midianites who are trying to sell, "You cannot sell on the Sabbath day." But then he opened up the gates on Monday and let them in. The Midianites were never expelled. No one was ever kicked out of Israel. As far as we know, no one in the entire history of Old Testament Israel was ever kicked out. There's no example of that, except maybe some of the kings might have done it. But in God's law, banishment is never prescribed. How did they deal with the son of the Egyptian who was blaspheming? Did they grab him and say, "Okay, back to you and your people"? No. You're blaspheming? Capital offense. Problem taken care of. Next. We never see anyone removing anyone outside back to their own nation, kicking them out. We do see separation from the assembly, but that's it. And God's law never says, okay, if they start acting up, kick them out of the country. Now, the question about what about housing, plumbing, food, and all that kind of stuff, what if we get too many people? I don't believe that is an argument that takes into account the resourcefulness of man, especially equipped with God's law. We're never going to have too many people in this country. We have status law, and that's what's holding us back from being able to provide the way that we should be able to provide for these people. The freedom of movement in the example cannot be restricted by a magistrate. That's not his responsibility. You're right. He could step in front of him and just, be annoying that way and say, well, you can't come in here. I'm not letting you in. But that's not giving justice to the sojourner, is it? He's allowed to buy and purchase property in your land. And the magistrate is only meant to enforce God's justice, not his own. Thank you.
All right, we will move to cross-examination now. So the way this works is Alan will start off. He'll get 10 minutes to ask Luke questions. Alan can only ask questions. Luke can only give answers during that time, and then we'll reverse it. We'll get rid of the podium here, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Brother Luke. Appreciate you. God bless you. So let's see. First question, your last statement. So let's say the governmental magistrate or the agent of, kind of the board or whatever. I'm just using that term loosely. You said blocking him is not enforcing justice to the sojourner. How would that person know that this person is a mere sojourner?
It's innocent until proven guilty. That's the way God's law works. That's, not only is it an American principle, but it's a biblical principle. Even with the crime of Achan, even though they basically knew Achan was the guy, the perp, who caused the destruction. Was it Ai, or when they were trying to destroy Ai and they lost? He said, "Okay, I went before you. I went in there and I grabbed the cloak and I grabbed the silver." And they didn't just grab him and kill him. They went, and it says, indeed, they found the cloak and they found. So even after his confession, he was still innocent until proven guilty. A self-confession is not enough to punish somebody according to biblical law. So the magistrate's responsibility is, if he's coming in here and he says he's coming in here just to live peaceably, until he proves it otherwise, I can't do anything about it. I don't have the responsibility. I avenge wrongdoers. That's it.
So in Nehemiah chapter 4, the discussion of the disturbance and the infiltration that I mentioned, chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, and then 11, they will not know or see until we come among them and kill them and stop the work. Was Nehemiah in the wrong to block access to Jerusalem on the part of the people that he had a credible threat, or he believed a credible threat was on the way?
I don't see that. I mean, I'm not going to say that he did anything wrong there. I'm not sure if he's establishing a precedent for the rest of us. I understand that in times of warfare, you put yourself at a defensive position. But as far as I know, I don't think he was restricting, like, nobody's allowed in at all. I mean, it was, how could he possibly know? If someone says, I'm a Jew, you know, it's impossible for him to fully enforce. He seemed to have closed off the city, but he didn't close off the nation.
You believe there's a strong distinction between the walls of Jerusalem and the nation of Israel at that time?
Absolutely, yeah.
What makes you think that?
Well, because they never kicked anybody out. They separated themselves, and they were trying to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem to establish the temple, but that's a one-off case. But they never kicked anybody out of Israel. Those foreigners were still allowed in Israel, but they weren't allowed in Jerusalem. I understand that.
You asked how, or you rhetorically asked how Nehemiah might know who's a Jew and who's not. Is that not because he was already in the process of preparing a list of nationals, like he publishes in chapter 13?
Yeah, I think he was documenting people. He was definitely documenting people. Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that's something that we can apply to today, because there's no distinction anymore between Jew and Gentile.
Okay, sure. You said that it wasn't a time of war.
No, I think it was a time of war.
It was a time of war,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What makes you think that it was a time of war?
Because his enemies had declared war on them.
Was the declaration of war not a secret one that was told to Nehemiah by rumor?
If he thought it was a credible threat, yeah.
What would make a credible threat? Why is it justifiable to close your border because of a credible threat?
Well, he didn't close the border. He just closed down Jerusalem. He didn't close down the country.
Did he not restrict the freedom of movement of people past the wall of Jerusalem?
I don't know how much he restricted it. I would have to have been there. You know, I mean, obviously he was still letting the Midianites come in. You know, he was letting them come in, just not on the Sabbath. You know, he wasn't restricting everyone. I mean, you could make the argument that at a time of warfare, if he was the civil magistrate and he said, anyone who is from this nation, they are attacking us, and to protect you, I'm not going to allow anybody in there. I would say that's probably justified in the city of Jerusalem when you're building a temple, but I wouldn't say that's a matter of national policy. It's never recommended in the law to do that.
Could you repeat who he was allowing in at the very first part of your answer? I didn't hear.
The Midianites.
Okay.
Yeah.
Midianites.
Yeah, the Midianites were trying to get in on the Sabbath, and he said no doing business on the Sabbath. But apparently they were allowed in any other day.
Thank you. Are you aware that this incident that you referred to about being outside the gates of the Jerusalem on the Sabbath occurs many years after, or at least many months after, this incident on the wall and the infiltration?
Yeah, but what does that have to do with?
Let's see how to answer your question with a question. Do you think that you're suggesting that it's wartime? So do you think that during wartime, I guess would be the right answer. Do you think that wartime, it is justifiable to restrict the freedom of movement of people?
To a nation, I don't see how you could possibly do that. I do believe that a magistrate, I believe Nehemiah was justified in doing what he did. However, I'm not sure if we can apply it to our day, because first off, he wasn't enforcing biblical law. He was acting as a civil commander. And if you make the argument that these foreigners were not allowed to be a part of the assembly, and the assembly meant Jerusalem, you're not allowed to come into Jerusalem, then you could say, okay, he was enforcing biblical law. But in the same way that Moses, when he came down from the mountain, he said, who was on the Lord's side? and he grabbed the Levites and they went off and they started killing people. That's not recommended in biblical law to do that. Was Moses wrong? No, I don't think he was, but I think there are circumstances where executive decisions can be made. But I don't think it's something to make new laws on. It's not something that you can say, okay, well, he did it, so I can do it. It's not a recommended that this is now policy for the whole nation. I don't think it's something to be taken and legislated into law. And they didn't do that because after they were done, people were allowed to come and go freely.
If I lived in pre-modern times and I lived in a walled city, but that had a relatively small population, like many kind of medieval fortresses have been, like walled cities like Constantinople, for example, or Rome for a time as well, and a force of military-aged men far exceeding the population shows up at the gates and asks to be let in, are you suggesting that there's no reason not to let them in?
In that situation, if like for example, if you're living in a walled city and those people desire to be let in that situation, I don't think you have any sort of biblical law to point to say they are not allowed to be in. I don't think you can abandon prudence. You can put the city in a defensive posture. I believe that that you can, but I don't think you can make a law saying that anyone who comes in here with a huge force that we don't trust is not allowed to come into the nation, or not allowed to come into the city.
So they would be allowed entrance?
I mean, it depends on the situation. I mean, the history of American immigration has been military-age men. And if we had, at the beginning, said no military-age men because you guys might try to take us over, most of us wouldn't be here. I believe there are circumstances that require prudence, but I don't think any of those circumstances warrant law.
What would the prudence sort of look like if you could, so well, actually, two parts of this question. So say that my walled city is the extent of my nation, which has been the case, numerous times throughout human history. For example, the Byzantine Empire was restricted to the city walls of Constantinople for many decades towards the end of their decline. Mm-hmm. That was their nation.
Yeah.
Okay. But the large force comes to their nation, not their city, but their nation. What would prudence look like in that case when the approaching mass of people far exceeds the native population?
I mean, every circumstance would be different. It would have to be adjudicated by the people of that city. I mean, if they show up with weapons and they're in a military position, I believe that the magistrate and the people are able, if they feel like they're defending themselves, to use those walls to defend themselves. Yeah.
What if they don't show up with weapons? What if they've just come beforehand and hidden caches of weapons inside the walls that only they know where they are, so that they can come infiltrate, go get the weapons, and then take over the city? Should that enter into our assessment of the risk of allowing these people entrance?
I mean, I think that's a possibility that could happen, that they could be deceptive. But I don't think that whatever the deception is, it doesn't warrant an international policy of allowing immigrants to come into your country.
So they should be allowed entrance in that case?
If there's a mass of people and you believe that they are innocent, even though they're being deceptive, I believe you should allow them entrance.
So Luke, you now have 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. So, what we were just talking about there, does Nehemiah, you agree with me that we shouldn't be making new laws outside of God's law?
Yes, I do agree. Sometimes the discussion of, as I mentioned before, like how you apply the laws, for example, the laws about what you're supposed to do with your harvest, or like leaning the edges of the fields. Mm-hmm. I don't have a field, you know what I mean? So how do I carry that out today in terms of applying it to modern society? That can be a question that sometimes looks to somebody like it's making a new law, when in fact it's just an attempt to try to apply the law of God to the modern context.
Okay. When we're talking about, so you go to like the parapet law. Does the parapet law justify building codes?
It would seem to, I think we were talking about this before actually, just informally, and I think I agreed with you, because so what you had said was that it wouldn't necessarily justify a building code where somebody comes in to inspect it and that kind of thing. Rather, it would come into play only if you failed to build a parapet around like a swimming pool or something, and some toddler drowns in your swimming pool because it was not fenced, right? That would add to your guilt upon the event of the tragedy, indicating your neglect at minimum, right? So I think that that's a better track to take.
Okay, all right, right, but we don't take principles from God's law and make new laws. We just enforce God's extant law.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, all right. Regarding the what Nehemiah was doing, do you think that's precedence for making national policy?
I think it might be or it might not be. There is way more to this discussion than can be had in a relatively short debate, but I do think that the example of Nehemiah, which is why I used it, does prove that that it is reasonable to restrict immigration on the part of the civil government, at least in certain circumstances. I think that we agree that, like you agree, that it's basically never or never. I think it's probably mostly never, but I do think probably sometimes. So the root of the disagreement is at a very kind of small area that we're trying to suss out now. But I don't think it's very often. I do think that the solution is that the nation serve the Lord Jesus Christ and trust Him and obey His law.
Can you point to a law that allows the civil magistrate to regulate immigration?
Yeah, it's only kind of by implication. So I think that that's a good question, and that was one reason I brought up the Exodus 23 passage and the obvious implication right after the fact of the Hittites just turning right around and coming back in. Would Israel allow that? Would God be fine with it? I think the obvious answer is no to that question. As far as what that law might exactly be, it's hard to say. So I do think that's a good question. I can't necessarily answer it directly. But I think that I don't think that it's reasonable to conclude that God would say, no, yeah, it's fine. Allow the Hittites that you just drove out to come right back 1 second later.
Okay. All right. Wasn't God's purpose to destroy those nations? Not necessarily drive them out, but wasn't the ultimate goal to actually destroy them so that they wouldn't exist anymore? Wouldn't really have the problem of them coming back in if they don't exist anymore.
That's true. However, they did not actually succeed in destroying them totally. Obviously they failed many times. Plus, you see, I chose to mention the Hittites specifically because there are still Hittites like Uriah. And there's another one mentioned, I forgot where I wrote it in my notes. So there's at least a couple other Hittites living in Israel later on, but Uriah is one example.
Right. And the Syrophoenician woman that Jesus Christ encountered, she was supposed to not be there, really, but, Christ still interacted with her. Even though she wasn't supposed to be there, do you think, I'm not going to say, do you think Christ was doing the wrong thing? But what do you think about Christ interacting with the Syrophoenician woman and not saying, you're not supposed to be here, get out?
Jesus was doing the right thing.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
You're welcome, everybody. Thank you very much. You can go home now. Look, the Syrophoenician, I'm not putting blame on somebody for trying to go to another country. Okay. My focus has been, what's the government's, does the civil government have any legitimate interest in making sure that a military infiltration is avoided or prevented? Because I do think there's a reason from the law of God to think that that's the case. So, some Syrophoenician woman is there in front of me, or some person who looks at me right in the face and brandishes a knife and says I'm a jihadist, right? Mm-hmm. Well, he hasn't stabbed me yet. I'm going to share the gospel with him. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And take defensive measures, but also share the gospel with him. And I don't want him to, I'm not necessarily mad he's there. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Just because he's an Arab or something. Right.
In Isaiah 16, when it says, shelter the Moabites who are fleeing the nation, that could have definitely been used by the Moabites to lie and be deceptive. Obviously it was be a mass of people coming in the nation, and God says, I want you to shelter these people.
Yeah.
Okay, why do you think he said that?
I think that the Lord wants the nations to show mercy to other people when there's a legitimate disaster, which is often not the case with kind of modern immigration things, but is often the case, as I know we agree. The CIA is just fomenting coups and revolutions all over the place, displacing people, destroying their homes, and completely destabilizing their society, so that in Venezuela, there's no food and no toilet paper and things like that sometimes. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to blame somebody for wanting to flee that if they're a good-hearted person, right? Just a reasonable person who, doesn't love Jesus necessarily, but they just they love their family, they just want to, be able to live. Who could blame them for that? You blame the dark powers that are trying to destroy and destabilize these nations. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think bad-hearted Moabites were being sheltered by the Israelites?
It's possible, yeah.
Okay, all right. You brought up Solomon and the census. Actually, on that line of thinking, let me just ask this: Do you think it was a good thing that they sheltered those Moabites, even though the Moabites were not allowed in the assembly? God told them to shelter them and let them live among you.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that's good?
Do I think that it was good for God to command that?
No, that they did that. That they
accepted?
Yeah, they accepted them.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Can you think of a people group that we shouldn't do that to? Even a massive people group.
Yeah, not really, but I think we got to look at the question a little bit differently, because we can't just you can't just necessarily always take it on face value that this mass of military-aged men that just so happen to be massing at the border. You said during one of your talks, or during your rebuttal, that there's not a mass of people, but there are masses of people that are crossing the southern border of the United States all the time in big masses. We have reason to believe that many of them are not refugees fleeing some disaster. And so I think that measures are legitimate to be taken to find out whether that's the case.
Okay, I'm saying, my point was in a biblical society. Yeah, I'm going to turn this into a question, I promise. In a biblical society, the clarification there is in a biblical society, there would not be mobs coming in because there's no choke area. So do you think, that we should have established choke areas for people coming in?
I would think of it rather in terms of it's certainly conceivable that there would be a biblical society, but due to topographical features and terrain, that there is a choke point. Okay. For example. So,
what do you think would be the penalty if an immigrant was coming in and they did not report they jumped over a wall and they ran through someone's private property? What do you think would be a good penalty for that person who did not report to the immigration officer?
I can't really think of one.
Okay. All right. Do you think we should give penalties where God has not given penalties?
Should we repeat, please?
Give penalties where God has not given penalties.
No.
Okay. So in that sense, how could we regulate immigration if they decide not to report to our immigration officer, and since God has not given us a punishment for not reporting to the immigration officer and doing whatever the immigration officer wants you to do, answer your questions. I mean, how could we be regulating immigration if we're not forcing people to go to the immigration, and we agree that we don't have a responsibility to go to an immigration officer?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question also. I think the answer lies in you establish your border controls, for lack of a better word, and people are challenged. The intention of these agents, for lack of a better word again, at the border, to interview the people wanting to come in. And if they don't cooperate, then they are blocked from entering. Okay? Now, you may say that that's not their responsibility. I disagree on a matter of principle. And besides, again, like I danced, in front of the pulpit, they're just exercising their freedom of movement to block. And if the immigrant decides that he's tired of this dancing game and he doesn't want to be blocked anymore by the agent, and he attacks the agent, that is a crime, biblically speaking.
Can you point to a law that allows or gives the responsibility of the magistrate to interrogate people coming in?
It's just freedom of communication. Anybody gets to ask anybody anything, basically.
Okay.
Freedom of speech.
Okay, freedom of speech. Yeah. All right, but if they ignore that immigration officer, we can't punish them.
Well, the immigration officer then gets to utilize his freedom of movement. You see what I mean?
Okay, but
there, you can pick it up next time. So we'll take a 5-minute break. If you got questions, please put them in the bucket back there, and we'll see you back in a few minutes. Thank you, gentlemen, for an interesting first half. Is this where it gets nasty, or is this where it gets...
Just have to wait and see.
All right. Alan, go ahead.
What's your reaction to the quote that I shared from Friedrich Engels in 1847, expressing that the goal of communists is the exact same goal that it seems that you're expressing now?
The freedom of movement?
The mingling with each other via such massive free association so as to dissolve nationalities?
My reaction to that would be that kind of silliness that he's talking about there can only exist in the mind of someone who has not been affected by God's law. God's law, where it punishes wickedness, allows for the free mingling in the right context of people. God's law is a preservative agent in society, in that it protects righteous people, and it perpetually protects righteous people, and perpetually gives wicked people the disadvantage. Only under statist systems can wickedness thrive the way that we see it thriving. So if he's talking about that and like the free mingle of people, so to break down society, that only works in a statist society. That wouldn't work in Israel, Old Testament Israel. That would not work, and it wouldn't work if we had biblical law. It wouldn't break down, because what he's talking about there is to break down society, you got to get in control of whoever's making the laws. And once you do that, you got to break down the barriers to get to whoever's stopping me from making the laws. And then once I start making the laws, then I can enforce my own autocracy, or my own laws. That only makes sense when you have a legislative body. Israel had no legislative body, and biblical societies do not have legislative bodies. So his idea of changing the culture, he might affect the culture, but he can't permanently change the culture, because there is no mechanism by which to permanently change the culture.
Why do you think the tyrannical Assyrians that I mentioned moved a whole bunch of disparate people into the northern kingdom that they had just conquered?
Oh, to enforce their way of life on the people.
Why do you think they moved a bunch of different groups that are specifically mentioned in 2 Kings 17 rather than just like one or two?
Same reason I think, most people do it. Land grants, favors, control of the people there.
Do you think it had anything to do with being able to set different tribes against each other in a small geographical setting, and they were sort of forced to be in that close,
divide and conquer
border
kind of thing?
Yeah.
Oh, I definitely think it's part of it, yeah. I mean, I think it was beyond just, I like the view. I definitely think it was military and strategy to conquer the culture, yeah.
When vastly outnumbered in your nation by people from a completely different tribe, what is to stop the other tribe from just taking over government by means of sheer numbers and democratic processes or whatever, and then like enforcing a new nanny state?
The biblical system of society does not allow that, because there is no democratic process by which to gain control of the political system. Since God is ruling over, and you only have one law that's not able to be changed, there is no process by which to change the law. There's no legislature. It doesn't matter if you have a plurality of people that don't like the law, there's no mechanism that they have by which to change it. Marxism won't work in biblical law, with biblical law.
Suppose the people, by sheer force of number, enforce a change on the society because they just outnumber everybody, especially because in my slightly implausible scenario, they're all military-aged males, and so they can just overpower everybody. What then?
If you're talking about sheer numbers coming into a biblical society and taking it over, I mean, that's really a problem that, what if a tidal wave comes in and kills all the righteous people and only wicked people are left? Well, of course, your society's going to go bad. But God's law is the only political system by which wicked people cannot gain the upper hand, institutionally speaking. You have to basically take over and establish a new political system to get your way, which is what the Israelites did at the end of Judges, at the beginning of Samuel. It's a high maintenance thing. It can be done, but it's extremely high maintenance, and it requires a majority of wicked people. And if you have a majority of wicked people, it doesn't matter what kind of immigration policy or wall or system you have, you're going down the tubes. Gravity's going to pull you down. Doesn't matter which direction you're going.
Suppose you just import all the wicked people from outside, from your neighboring nation that hates God, into your Christian nation, and
okay, let's say if they hate God, the righteous people are perpetually equipped to deal with that, because God's law says if anyone goes after you and practices idolatry in front of you, you have the legal right to execute them. And it also says that if there is one of your political bodies, one of your cities, goes after other gods, you have the right and the responsibility to make war on them. So if someone is trying this, it's not going to happen overnight. It would be gradual. But God's law accounts for this scenario of what if people try to slowly take over the society via idolatry. And God's law says that if this happens, if there's anyone that says, okay, let's go after other gods, let's stop serving Yahweh, that is a capital offense. And if they slowly take over a city, go in there by osmosis, and all of a sudden, the Assyrians are here, and suddenly they have the city, and now they're saying, we're gonna serve, Baal or whatever it was the Assyrians were serving at that time. Then the Bible says that the rest of the nation has a responsibility to make war upon that city. And I think that's the controlling mechanism for stopping the gradual and slow osmosis-like change of a society from righteousness to wickedness.
Why compare it to a tidal wave when it's not really conceivable how one might go about making a lot of precautions to stop a tidal wave, whereas there are precautions easily taken to stop a mass of people far outnumbering your population from entering your nation?
We don't have a good way to stop people far outweighing. There's never any good way to stop. If they want to get in here, they're going to get in here. Historically speaking, I don't know of any nation that's kept people out if they wanted to get in. You're always going to get in. It's just a matter of time. There is no way to stop a nation from coming in here, even if you have a wall. I think the thing that's going to keep them out is a righteous and godly society. The promise there in Deuteronomy is they will fear you if you follow these laws. That's what's going to keep them out better than any wall or immigration policy that we set up.
Look, I agree.
Okay.
I guess I'm just trying to think of some questions just to get at the little part where we disagree. Are you not aware that certain human societies throughout history, for example, Constantinople in the 15th century, I really like Byzantine history. Constantinople was a walled city with the best walls that any human society has ever known. Mm-hmm. And for a time, they were reduced only to the city. That was the nation. That was the Byzantine, or what they would have called the Roman Empire at the time. Mm-hmm. Is it not the case, or are you aware that they were able to keep people out successfully until a massive military invasion destroyed their walls and sacked the city?
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Why do you say that?
No wall can stop a military invasion.
Okay. I hear you. What should be the penalty for a bunch of military-aged sojourners, or sojourners, either one, from gleaning literally all the fields and causing the native widows to starve? Should there be a penalty? I should ask that first. Or recourse?
If you can establish that they're stealing. In your example, you said, in that you used the jihadi refugees. Let's say they come in and they start taking all the food, and the widows and the orphans get nothing. First off, a premium is placed upon the widows and orphans. Magistrate's responsibility is to make sure that the widows and orphans and the business owner, whoever's gleaning the fields, it's his responsibility to let them on first, to prioritize the widow and the orphan. He's in control. He can kick anybody out when he wants to if he suspects foul play. That's his right as a private property owner. It's not the magistrate's responsibility to vet people who are coming in to glean.
What makes you think that he should prioritize the widow and the orphan when the passage says the widower, the widow, the sojourner, and the fatherless?
Job 29, and I gave justice to the widow and the orphan, and true religion is taking care of the widow and the orphan. Doesn't mention the sojourner. So in my mind, that prioritizes the widow and the orphan above the sojourner. Especially a man who can provide for himself is expected to, he'd be much lower on the priority list of making sure who gets what. And as you see in Boaz, he was controlling who was getting what when he said, leave a little bit extra for Ruth. He was prioritizing her. He was in control. And if there are people coming onto your land and you suspect that they're just there to steal all the food, you have the right to kick them out. And, sorry. Furthermore,
Go ahead, Luke.
okay. In your example of the sojourner coming in to glean all of the resources from the field, and suddenly the widow and the orphan are being left behind. You said they would be jihadi refugees. In a biblical society where idolatry and blasphemy was punished, do you see jihadis coming to a biblical nation?
Absolutely.
And thriving? Where idolatry is punished?
Yeah, because of the Islamic doctrine of deception. I forgot exactly the Arabic word for it, but
right.
They're certainly recommended to lie so as to infiltrate the target nation before they achieve sufficient sway, influence, and power in the population to expand their jihadist activities. Again, I'm not trying to say that every person who comes in is like that, but there are some, and I think that it's wise and legitimate to put in place some mechanisms so as to try to figure out who they are and stop them from coming in sometimes. Not all the time, maybe sometimes.
Okay, maybe sometimes. Yeah. What would your example of maybe sometimes be?
Well, like if 100,000 military-aged Arabs show up at the border, and I know it's a crazy example, I use it as a reductio ad absurdum. If they show up at the border and they say, hey, it's peacetime, don't restrict the free movement of people, we would just like to walk across the border, please. Well, I think that it's legitimate for the government to ask questions about that. Okay. And it sounds like maybe you don't, but I think that that's silly.
Okay. God's a law that says that if a city becomes, tells you to go after other gods, obviously the Muslims would not be able to take over the whole nation in one fell swoop. They'd have to do it slowly, as they have done. They take it piece by piece. Do you see them getting success if we enforce Deuteronomy 13? I mean, do you see them being a credible threat if we enforce biblical law? Because they weren't the only ones, historically speaking, right, to be deceptive about changing the society in which they entered. Yeah. Do you see them being a credible threat if we enforce Deuteronomy 17, which is, if anyone tells you to go after other gods, right, and if you see a city go after other gods, do you see jihadists still being a credible threat? Yeah.
Well, so partially you're assuming, there's a couple elements to that. Like, for one thing, you're assuming that this city or whatever, that maybe
political
imagine
body.
Like a small nation.
Political body.
Yeah, thank you. So, or community, something like that, right?
Yeah.
So if the plan is carried out with such success to cause major damage to that political body all at one time because of the success of the infiltration, then that's, the fact that you then, successfully repel the invaders and execute, via Deuteronomy 13, the servants of a false god is small comfort to those who lost people in the initial attack. So that's one part of it. And also, again, these people are not coming in to evangelize. In my jihadi example, they're not coming to evangelize and convert. They're trying to convert by the sword. That's how they conquered all of the Middle East and North Africa. They converted by the sword, and some of that was infiltration and not just like cavalry charges with drawn sabers. And so if we say that if we have literally no mechanism in place to suss out an infiltrator before he infiltrates and puts in place a big apparatus to destroy my nation and kill my children, I'd like there to be an obstacle in his way rather than zero obstacles in his way.
How would we suss out someone who's being deceptive?
You ask questions by.
Okay, he's being deceptive the whole time. I mean, are you a jihadist? No. Okay, you can come in. I mean, if we're asking people at the border, they say I'm not a jihadist. I'm not a Muslim, and the government gives their stamp of approval. Isn't it worse?
So I take your point, but let's consider a modern example, like right now. So it's widely reported that crossing the southern border with Mexico, it's not just Mexicans and Guatemalans, right?
Yes.
It's people from China, it's people from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Jordan and Qatar and wherever. What are they refugees? What are they fleeing from? How did they get from, your example of the Moabites is useful and good because Moab borders Israel, right? So if you have a disaster in Moab such that people need to flee to the bordering nation, great. That's just in the providence of God, and you're supposed to, rescue them and help them and do what you can for refugees. But somebody's not a refugee when they're fleeing, like in the States, when they're fleeing a disaster they claim happened that you can't find any, record of or evidence for in Bahrain or Turkey or something. So what are they doing in the United States? So you ask those questions. Are you a jihadi? No. No, seriously, are you a jihadi? So you ask them twice, that's one way. But then you say, what are you fleeing? Well, this thing happened in Turkey. Yeah, where?
Okay.
And there you got it. I think there's a lot of ways to go about that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. But if they don't show up to that interrogation,
well, they have to because they can't just cross the border because of the protections in place.
Right. But I mean, we have so much borderland. We can't ask everyone. I mean, it's impractical to set up a border station every 5 feet. Obviously, we have it right now. We've had it more than we've ever had it in our entire history. We've had protection against the border wall. How do you see this playing out practically in interviewing everybody who gets in?
Yeah, in the United States, it seems pretty implausible.
Okay.
But I'm suggesting that in other contexts, especially in like a smaller nation, for example, that might have, as I mentioned before, topographical choke points that people have to walk through to get into your nation unless they want to cross a mountain. Take Switzerland. Let's say everybody in Switzerland decided that John Calvin is the best Swiss that ever lived. And they're like, what did John Calvin preach? Oh, he preached the gospel. We're going to believe the gospel. So now Switzerland loves the gospel. And now a bunch of people want to go to Switzerland. Well, how can they get into Switzerland? It's not necessarily as easy as walking across a 5,000-mile wide border. There's a few passes. And I think it's in their best interest to ask some questions if 100,000 military-aged men from wherever, Turkey, show up and demand entrance.
Okay, how can you interrogate 100,000 men?
It might take some time.
Okay. All right. I mean, it just seems to me to be impractical to interrogate 100,000 and ask them what they're doing.
Not as impractical as 100,000 military-aged men coming all the way to freaking Switzerland. Why are you here? If you had a refugee crisis, maybe you should walk 10 miles away from your home and stay there, so that you could go back home once it's all a little bit better and you can aid in the recovery. Why are you in Switzerland 2,000 miles away? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, what do you think about the fact that most of the immigrants in the United States are not local? I mean, our fathers and mothers are from Uzbekistan, are from Ukraine. There's Ukrainians in here tonight. I mean, my wife is from Brazil. If there's people interrogating questions and they don't like the answers and they're denying entrance, isn't that unjust?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. All right. So what's the point of interrogation?
To find out whether they're a credible threat. It's not if they don't like it. It's if they're a credible threat. And obviously that's going to be subject to all kinds of human weaknesses and all that kind of stuff. But all of this stuff is subject to human weaknesses. So I just think that...
Okay, but does God's law call for interrogation of immigrants?
Well, they're not necessarily being interrogated. They're being asked questions. Like at the end of our last cross-ex, you said, by what right does the governmental magistrate? Well, he's asking questions. And what, I don't get to ask you questions? I think he gets to ask questions.
Well, he gets to ask questions, but do we have to answer them?
No, but then you don't necessarily just get to walk in because maybe you're a credible threat. If you're number 50,743 military-aged male from Turkey in Switzerland, and you don't want to answer questions, then I think there's a good reason to say, well, sorry, buddy, you can't come through here.
Can you name a time in history when the immigrants were not military-aged men?
When they were not?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, historically, hasn't it always been military? I mean, aren't they the most likely to immigrate? They got the time, they got the resources, they have no family, they're the strongest. I mean, if we're going to America from Uzbekistan, I mean, doesn't it make sense that, of course, it's going to be military-aged men?
Yeah, they might be, but in that case, it wouldn't be a refugee situation. Where are all the women and children? Why aren't they fleeing? Why didn't you help them? So that would be a completely different story in that case. In that case, it would be somebody who's, he gives a different excuse. And it couldn't be I'm fleeing a refugee crisis or something.
Okay, but you're saying he doesn't have to answer the question, but the magistrate doesn't have to let them in.
Right.
Do you think that's justice for the sojourner? The same law for everyone? I mean,
Just answer the question, my man. Just answer the question. I'm
okay.
trying to protect my nation from 50,000 or 100,000 military-age males trying to enter my society from 2,000 miles away, in my example.
Okay, but if they don't have a responsibility to, I mean, because obviously I would be afraid if I was going to another nation, right? If I would be afraid of incriminating myself. So don't you think it's imprudent to be asking these people questions, because they could incriminate themselves, especially if they don't know the language very well, don't you think?
Yeah, you might be afraid. At the same time, you might also be a saboteur. So I think that it's incumbent upon the civil magistrate to take some legitimate or take some precautionary measures in that case.
Okay, but what makes the immigrants coming in any worse than the people who are already here who want to destroy America? Why don't we interrogate all these people here too?
Yeah, there's not necessarily anything worse than them, but there is something that precipitated their coming, for one thing, and I'd like to find out what that is. And also there's the increasing risk.
But the magistrate doesn't, don't you agree that the magistrate doesn't have a right to know what that is? They don't have a right to know that.
Probably not a right, but he has a right to ask. Oh,
That's our time.
dang, the rest of my question was going to be, or the answer was going to be awesome too.
You got a closing statement coming right up.
yeah.
Can we get the platform here, or the podium?
It's a good.
That'll work. All right, Alan, you want to give us your closing statement?
Thanks again, everybody, for coming here tonight. I really appreciate your attention. I appreciate Brother Luke for engaging me in such a brotherly and cordial way. I think that we were able to get through a lot of good material and have a really good discussion. And I think that, to be perfectly honest, it's I said several times during the cross-examination that I believed he was asking a good question. At least twice I remember. And some of those questions, are really, really hard to answer. Maybe don't have an answer for them right now. And it reminds me I've read a lot of Gary North more than any kind of Reconstructionist author, and one of the things that Gary North has said a couple times in his writings that I've read is that as we try to move forward into trying to reconstruct society with God's law as the supreme law of the land, trying to understand how you take the law of God and apply it in a modern context can often be challenging, and we don't even have it all figured. We don't have it all figured out yet. I mean, Rushdoony, wrote how much about that, and he wrote, recorded all these tapes and sermons. North wrote how many, millions of pages or whatever he wrote, and still there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered. And I think that this is kind of among them, especially when it comes to the details about how you might go about engaging in border control. And it's certainly true that not every situation is the same, and in many other situations it's going to be really, really tough to try to do that. For example, in the modern United States, like as he obviously said and is absolutely correct, it's a total Band-Aid to try to build some wall or something. I mean, you see people like routinely climbing the wall all the time, or they're cutting it through it, or sometimes the Biden administration just like throws open the gates, and you can't like necessarily stop that. Because there's just like so many people, and it's so vast and so wide. So the answer is obviously that we must repent as a nation and turn to the law of God with our whole hearts and find Jesus Christ. I just think that even in this much more kind of postmillennial success story where you have a nation full of people who love Jesus, there is still the risk that that the Prince of Darkness might stir up another nation to try to destroy your Christian nation by violence and by infiltration, taking advantage of your naivete. And naivete, I think the Switzerland example is a good one, I think, because of the kind of the limited access or something. Obviously, not every nation is like that, but just take it. The thesis was, should the government regulate it, right? And I think the answer is yes, sometimes, probably. And so if we can think of at least one example when that's legitimate and possibly wise, then I think, like I said, the debate thesis is affirmed. And so if you do have 100,000, say, Turks, just to take an example, because there's a lot of Turks, and they do have a history of violence against the West, and so if they should show up at the border of Switzerland and everybody in Switzerland loves Jesus, are they obligated to let them in? It's foolhardy and nonsensical to say, yeah, just come on in. It's fine, dude. Oh, look, another 100,000 over the border. I guess we'll just let them in too. And what if it's 1 million? What if it's the entire population of Turkey just moving to Switzerland? Is there any reason that anybody who loves Jesus might say, we should probably put a limit on this before the entire population of Switzerland is just a few million people? What if there's 60 million Turks in there? I'm just, using crazy examples here. It's obvious that you can't just solve whatever problems would arise from that by saying, well, if anybody openly blasphemes God or they openly worship a false god, we'll put them to death. How are you going to do that exactly when you're surrounded by a mob of, tens of thousands of Turks in this one place? Oh, you found this one guy bowing down to Allah in your public square. Okay, here comes 2 judicial officers. Let's carry out our judgment on this guy. Oh, I wonder what all these tens of thousands of people shouting Allah's name. What are we going to do about that? Well, I guess we'll just start swinging, or maybe we can prepare a whole bunch of ropes to hang them, or we can get a bunch of rocks. We live near mountains. It's completely implausible. So you would want to prevent that kind of thing ahead of time, which is the kind of thing that Nehemiah and Ezra saw. And if you think that Nehemiah and Ezra had good ideas about how to apply the law of God, then there is absolutely reason to think that Nehemiah and Ezra were kind of on the right track there. And just pretending that, the law, like the wall of Jerusalem, is not very close to analogous to a national border is a pretty tough thing to do. Oh boy, there was a lot of content here, and I forgot the thing about the sojourner gleaning as well. So I'll leave it there. I will say this, that obviously I tried to challenge Luke on the small areas I mentioned again where I think we disagree, and most of its answers I believe to be pretty satisfactory. However, I do believe that there is still room for sometimes immigration restrictions because of the examples that we have, and because of the example of the Hittites being expelled, which I don't think we saw a sufficient answer to. I thank you very much for your attention. May the Lord Jesus Christ receive all glory and praise from all of his people and all the universe for all times. Amen.
Go ahead, Luke.
Well, thanks again, Alan. That was very great. Thanks for all your questions and your answers. I really enjoyed it. And thanks again, Conrad, for moderating this debate. And again, for Chris and Dave, who worked so hard to set this up. Chris was heavily beleaguered trying to get this set up. So thanks a lot, Chris. Did a lot of hard work to do this. So our responsibility as Christians when it comes to border control and when it comes to punishing people who come in here if they do something wrong, and etc. We don't deal in probablys. We deal in thus saith the Lord. We can't say, well, what about this scenario that comes up, and what about this, and we should probably do X. That's not an argument that we make as Christians. We use the law of God, and the promises that come along when we are faithful to God and his word. We've got to believe the promises that we will have peace in our nation, and that God will protect us, and that God will take care of all the nuances and whatabouts. My example for that would be in Ruth chapter 4. God's law does not tell us how to do contractual business. But we see the custom of that time was to take off your sandal and hand it to somebody else, and that was the custom of that time. Now, if we were having a debate on how to do contracts, we could say, well, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly how to do contracts, so we should probably institute this law to do it. But that's not what they did. They developed customs, and they didn't force or punish people who didn't follow their customs. When we're hauling people off to jail and we're punishing them, fining them, kicking them out, or whatever punishment you want to give, you had better have chapter and verse ready to say, here's where your right to dominion is being infringed upon. I don't want to hear, here's how the Christian Prince sees it. He wasn't arguing for that. I'm not saying he was. I don't want to hear about, here's our best guess on how to apply the law of God to your sorry situation. It's chapter and verse. You have responsibility as a civil magistrate to enforce God's law, and there is no punishment in God's law for immigrants coming here and deciding, I'm not going to justify why I'm here. Not a single punishment. You've heard Alan say that he can't think of any law that you're breaking when you decide not to speak to the civil magistrate and to justify yourself why you're there. there is no law preventing anyone from coming into a nation. There are laws in place that protect you and me and society when they start trying to cause trouble. But the idea of innocent until proven guilty is all over the text of the Old Testament. And we are not supposed to interrogate people when they come in here and make them prove their innocence to us, because that's the opposite of innocence until proven guilty. It's why Rushdoony hated lie detector tests, because you're trying to prove your innocence. But the onus is not on you to prove your innocence, it's on them to prove your guilt. And you cannot prove guilt on any immigrant coming in here, especially if he's dishonest. And you cannot avenge anyone, as the responsibility of the government is. That's his responsibility. He's not a protector. Protection is a byproduct of his avenging wicked people. You cannot avenge anyone deciding to come in here and say, I'm not going to justify myself to the civil magistrate as to why I'm here. Even if you're dishonest to the civil magistrate, there's still no penalty that you can give and punish somebody who decides to come here. And you can ask, what if 100,000 people come here and all that kind of stuff, and it looks like they're ready to fight and all that kind of stuff. These questions do not give the authority. I'm not saying it's a dumb question or a stupid question or a bad question. It's a legitimate question. But that does not mean that the civil magistrate, is now allowed to impede the progress of people coming into your nation. God never gives him that responsibility, not once. We only do what God tells us to do in his. The civil magistrate has a responsibility to enforce God's law the way it's written, and not to try to go with his best guess and make new laws and policies that punish the innocent along with the guilty, because we suspect everyone who comes into this nation. If we're going to love the sojourner as we love ourselves, you have to ask, what would I want when I move to another country? Do I want to be accosted and have to justify myself? My friends, the law of the Lord is perfect. There is no immigration policy in there. Thank you very much.
All right, well, we now have some questions from the audience. Let's get rid of this podium, and then we'll get into it. So the way we're going to do this is each person will have a minute to answer. If you don't want to use the whole minute, that's fine, but and we'll just kind of alternate who starts first. So I'll start with a question for Luke, and then you'll get a minute, and Alan, you'll get a minute to respond. Luke, would you say the circumstances in which it would be justified to restrict entry en masse would be the same circumstances that would justify an individual using lethal force to restrict entry to his own property?
The private property owner has a special, he has different responsibilities than the civil magistrate. The pastor does not have the responsibility to protect my private property. I do. I do not have the responsibility to shepherd the flock. He does. The civil magistrate has a responsibility to avenge the wrongdoer. The responsibility of the magistrate is to not prevent people coming into the nation. That's not his responsibility. His responsibility is to avenge those who do evil. Now, if you're talking about war, I believe in certain circumstances, as we've seen in the Bible, people were justified in making executive decisions that didn't affect the entire nation, that affected local areas, but they did not make it a national policy after that. They did not establish law after that. So I believe that there are situations where the civil magistrate, if he has the option and the ability. Am I being timed?
Yeah, you're out. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm out. Oh, sorry.
Am I being timed? No, Hello? Thank you. Yeah, so I mostly agree with what Brother Luke said. It sounds, that question reminds me in some ways, although it's much better posed. Sometimes in these immigration debates, you'll see people kind of get all outraged with their, Trump-flavored outrage, and they'll say, you first, you need to allow, 10 Mexicans or whatever into your bedroom, and let them sleep on your floor and on your couch. I think that's kind of a low quality argument, and obviously for reasons that Brother Luke explained. So that's why I didn't use it. But I would say that, the question about war, I think is a weakness in his position, since he did bring it up in the announcement. There's nothing in the law of God that sets aside like the difference between war and peacetime that I'm aware of, so as to restrict the free movement of people. And that's something I didn't explore quite as much as probably I should have during the cross-acts, but I would probably, if I could, ask what, on what basis, if you just say, oh, and now it's wartime, now all the rules change, and in this section, well, just because it's that section, it's not the whole nation, but that doesn't make a difference.
All right, for Alan, do you believe pre-crime is an option if you believe a person or group is a threat?
Pre-crime?
I take it by pre-crime they mean taking measures against someone before they've actually committed a crime, I presume.
So no, that's a good question. So I think that, but I don't think that is what I've been recommending, nor do I think that it is what Nehemiah was doing, but Nehemiah was doing something. He took measures to protect against an infiltration, not an overt declaration of war, and not 100,000 people showing up saying, we're going to come in and murder you all, but we come in peace for now. So he was responding to something that he believed was a good enough reason to disallow the free movement of people into a specific place that was not private property. The city of Jerusalem was not private property. So if you think that it was legitimate for him to do that, then you agree with the thesis statement of the debate, that it is at least sometimes okay for the civil magistrate to stop the free movement of people into a place that is not private property.
Reset for Luke. Go ahead.
If you suspect people are here for nefarious activities and you can prove that they're not here to immigrate, then you can say, okay, they're here for warfare, and then I will, I think it's possible to entertain, what do we do now in light of this new information that they're not here to immigrate? But if they're there to immigrate, then there's really nothing that can be done. And until you can prove otherwise, if they're just there to immigrate, you're not allowed to restrict immigration. I believe the civil magistrate can restrict, has a responsibility, especially in warfare, to restrict movement of the enemy, but they're not immigrants. So the civil magistrate has no authority to tell immigrants where to go, when to go, and how to go.
Now, Luke, if God is a God of order and a God who has established no boundaries of nations, is it not plausible to, or actually a God who has established boundaries of nations, is it not plausible to infer that a nation has a duty to ensure that border immigration policy is orderly?
If you can point to a responsibility given by God, then yes, but the responsibility is never given by God to the state to make sure that that happens. It's never their responsibility, it's never under their purview to make sure that borders are secure and that immigration goes orderly. It's never their responsibility to do that. Since God is a God of order, shouldn't we all be healthy? Shouldn't the state enforce that we're all healthy all the time? Doesn't that make sense, right? If you're unhealthy, that produces disorder. So shouldn't the state be in charge of, making sure we're all healthy? Well, no, it's not their responsibility. God has not given the responsibility of the state to look at you, track you, and make sure you're eating your vegetables. So no, the answer is no. Since God is a God of order, he's given us a law that produces order, and us inferring and establishing law on top of that is not what God has told us to do.
No.
I would largely agree with the answer to the question. I'm not trying to make this debate, a big exercise in pedantry and trying to, trumpet I won on this technicality of the debate or something. That's not the intention here. Just from the beginning, I've said that I think that at least sometimes you can establish that it is legitimate for the civil government to restrict immigration sometimes. And I think that here we have an example, like I pointed out in Exodus 23 in my opening statement, the first passage that I read. It may not be in the law moving forward, but it was legitimate for those Israelites at that time. And if it was one time, then that means it's sometimes legitimate. Now, maybe it's not going to come up very much. Maybe we won't ever see that scenario again. That's possible. So maybe that's kind of like maybe the technicality moving forward, but what else would you conclude from the fact that the Israelites were driving out these people, and then it's totally plausible that once they're driven out past the boundary that God fixed, they turn right around and come right back in? Would God be okay with that? It's obvious that the answer is no. It's obvious that God would want the Israelites to take action to prevent it.
So, Alan, in our current situation, would it not be prudent to at least stop the bleeding, as it were, by preventing foreigners from coming in until we clean up our act in America?
Well, I think it would be prudent, but the problem is that it's far from obvious how to do it. And obviously all of the hopes placed in saviors like Trump have been false hopes. He's not going to do it. He's not going to try to build a border wall. He's not going to make it better. All he wants to do is boast about, how great his wall is going to be. If you just ask anybody. So people stream in even through the partial wall that Luke, I guess, rightly said that there's never been more protection. Well, that's true, but it's still like the southern border. I looked at the map; is just massively unprotected, and there's obviously these other ways to come in. I think in theory that might be nice to do that, especially since we do see all these reports of military-age men from far-flung nations coming in for obvious reasons, to create havoc in the United States and all that kind of stuff. And they're there at the behest of dark overlords and whatnot. But that's completely impractical at this stage. What we need to do is repent and turn to Jesus Christ.
Can you read the question again?
Yes. In our current situation, would it not be prudent to at least stop the bleeding, as it were, by preventing foreigners from coming in until we clean up our own mess in America?
Why don't we polish the brass on a sinking ship? The immigrants are not the problem in America. For people who are wondering and thinking about that question, think of the worst possible scenario, nightmare situation that you have seen in America, or that you think might happen if the immigrants get out of control, and I will raise you the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots. Not done by immigrants, done by Americans. Rioting, looting, destroying people's property. Worst fever pitch nightmare dream of anyone who's afraid of immigrants happened in 2020 by our own people. How in the world are we thinking about immigrants coming in here as bleeding when we have people rioting in our streets and babies being murdered right now? And you think that immigrants are the bleeding?
Luke, what is the biblical reason for cities having walls but not nations? Are civil governments of cities held to a different standard than civil governments of nations?
I don't think there's any sort of wrong thing about a nation having walls. I don't think there's anything wrong with a nation building walls as a defensive measure against an invading army. It's not the responsibility of the civil magistrate to ask people, what are you doing here, and to regulate who comes in and who does not. I don't think it's wrong to build a wall and around your city or around your nation. There's nothing wrong with that. You are not allowed, however, to take tax money away from people, to steal it from them, to build your wall. It's not allowed to do that. And you are not allowed to restrict people coming in who want to live here. But if you want to build a wall, have at it. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's just know the responsibility of the civil magistrate is not to, after they built a wall, use it to control who comes in and who goes out.
So the answer is that you build a wall, but the purpose is really questionable. I'm not really sure I understand what the purpose of a wall would be, because you can't, in the face of an invading army, you get news that an army is invading. Okay, so now we're going to build a wall or something. It takes a long time to build a wall. You can't build a wall in response to an invading army very easily. That takes it's just a huge investment. And then still, I would point out, I think that one of the fundamental inconsistencies in Brother Luke's position is that when it's wartime, or when you think you have reason to think that it's wartime, just because somebody said it's wartime, or they declared war on you, whatever that is, it's just a declaration, doesn't necessarily mean anything, much like, if I draw an eagle on the paper and say, okay, now your stuff belongs to me because I'm the government or whatever. Just because it's wartime, what makes you think that now it's okay to restrict the free movement of people within your nation, or into your nation? I think that is incoherency, and that can't be resolved, or I haven't heard a resolution yet.
Alan, can an illegal alien be able to vote based on God's law?
Oh, that's a tough question. I'll probably have to defer to Luke on this because he may be better at it. I think, you've rightly pointed out before about the lack of legislative bodies, in God's law. And, the reason for that is, in part to prevent, as he said again, the creation of new laws. Once you institute a Congress or a legislature or something, and now they're voting things, right? And so now they can vote a police force into existence. And, but how do you pay the police force? That's okay, we'll just vote to create the IRS. And then we'll vote to, make the IRS take money from people by means of the police force to pay the police force, and on it goes. So they create new laws. So I I'm not 100% sure what purpose or what role there would be for any citizen voting at all in a Christian nation that's following God's law. So would you please enlighten us more, Brother Luke?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It's exactly the way I think about it. Voting in biblical theonomic society would just be voting for people, but those people would just sit down and judge using God's law. And also, talking about illegal immigrants, the Bible never recognizes crimes of status. You can never be a criminal by status. You are only criminal by action. So being a homosexual in Old Testament Israel under God's law was not a crime. You could walk around and say I'm a homosexual, but legally speaking, nothing could be done to you. It's a status. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every charge will be established, right? Someone saying I'm a homosexual or I'm an illegal immigrant has nothing to do with something being established on 2 or 3 witnesses. And again, there are many people who have identified themselves as a status, but a status in biblical law is never something that can be punished. So illegal immigration is not a category of biblical thinking.
So Luke, what does idolatry look like? Any modern examples?
Idolatry can be both negative and positive, but a positive example of idolatry is, for example, the spiritual practice of many forms of yoga would be idolatry. Witchcraft would be idolatry. The negative aspects, the promotion of atheism would be idolatry. The promotion of agnosticism would be considered idolatry. Anytime you're promoting something other than the God of the Bible, that is considered idolatry. So the nation is protected under God's law from the institution and the promotion. Obviously, under God's law, again, someone can say, I'm an atheist, but that's not a punishable crime. The promotion of atheism is. So God's law allows for everyone to have their own private beliefs, but it never allows for the promotion of idolatry.
I think we can throw statism on the pile too, maybe, that might be a little bit rough there, but I think that there's an argument to be made there. I was also going to say, I agree with what he said. Also, the open practice of false religion has no place in a society governed by God's law. So that would be, when you talk about openly, as he rightly pointed out, the private practice is one thing, because what are you going to do? How are you going to prove that, right? You have to think about, how would it be proven in a court of law that somebody's privately practicing a false religion? Well, there'd have to be 2 or 3 witnesses or 2 or 3 lines of evidence, right? What are you going to do? Send police to knock down windows and peer into people's houses to see if they're bowing down, to Mecca? I think we can all see that would be a terrible idea. However, what if somebody wants to build a mosque? That would be an example of an open practice of false religion. Because what do you do in mosques? It's not like they're saying, can I just build a building? Yeah, sure. Can I build a mosque? No, because that's an open practice of false religion. That is also proscribed by the law of God.
To follow up on that, because it seems like this is a fundamental issue in immigration, how are you going to define? So it's common in Calvinist Arminian debates to say, yes, Arminians serve a different God, or Calvinists serve a different God. Mm-hmm. Where are you going to draw the line?
The law of God draws a line because the application of stoning in God's law does not allow for petty differences to bring enough conviction for me to actually throw a stone at somebody. And secondly, yeah, you could say that they worship a different God, but it's not provable in a court of law that they worship a different God, because all they have to do is say, no, I worship the God of the Bible, and I believe everything the Bible says. And there goes your whole testimony against that person. So heresy is not punishable by death. I want to be very clear. There's a difference between idolatry and heresy. Now you could say all heresy is idolatry, right, maybe in the mind, but it's not provable in court. And all the person has to say is, no, I love the Lord and I worship him, and I believe everything the Bible has to say. I just see it differently than you. So God's law only punishes idolatry. It does not punish heresy.
Alan?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, obviously you can conceive a scenario where somebody is so overcome with hate for somebody who is an Arminian or whatever to try to carry that case through to its final conclusion and just try to prove to the whole society that an Arminian deserves being stoned by the community. But we have to remember that we're talking about a nation in this hypothetical scenario that loves the law of God very much. And if you love the law of God very much, you don't want to stone an Arminian. I don't want to stone any Arminians.
Amen.
There's a couple Pelagians. I wouldn't mind a couple pebbles thrown their way, but I don't want to bury them under a mound. You know what I'm saying? So it's implausible to think that a bunch of people who are so controlled by the Holy Spirit that they've ordered their whole society around the law of God, or they're trying as hard as they can to do that, would then think that it's a good idea to stone Arminians, especially if they stand up in a court of law and say, I believe the gospel of grace and the Trinity and all this stuff.
Alan, should Christians oppose Republican efforts to build the border wall?
Oh, that's a good and spicy question. One I haven't really considered very much. Probably because any effort to build the border wall, how's it being financed again? Oh yeah, it's being financed by tax dollars and made up money, which is also tax, essentially, because every dollar that the Federal Reserve conjures into existence is a tax on the value, the cash value, like the buying power of your dollar, right? So every dollar that the federal government spends is destructive. So the only people who are going to be building the border wall are governments, and these garbage governments that we have right now, full of wicked people who hate the law of God so much. Everything they do, we should oppose, unless they're trying to do things that destroy governmental structures, destroy tax structures and power structures, and render actual justice. But building a border wall doesn't establish justice. That's not been my argument this whole time.
I think you covered that one pretty well. Of course, we should oppose Republican calls to build the border wall. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. And do you think they're actually going to use that money for the border wall? I have questions for you Republicans out there. You think they're going to use that money for the border wall? I've got a wonderful bridge I'd love to sell you.
Is it near the border?
Yeah.
All right, Luke, we'll wrap it up with this question. Wouldn't it be fair to say that immigration regulation and punishing idolatry are not mutually exclusive? And might it be possible that both may need to be actively enforced, especially considering the current state of our nation?
I just look at immigration control as polishing brass on a sinking ship. Immigration control will be controlled much more effectively if we establish anti-idolatry and anti-blasphemy laws the way that God has told us to do it. That will control immigration far greater than any sort of policy that we can come up with. But I don't think immigration is an imminent problem at all, not even remotely. For the entire history of the United States, people have argued that if we don't do something, we're going to take over. Benjamin Franklin, back in 1750, was saying, if we don't do something about the Germans, we're all going to be speaking German tomorrow. We got to do something. This has been a problem of this holding it above our heads, and if you don't give me your tax dollars right now and surrender your freedoms and your control of society to me to round up all these people, it's never a good idea to surrender our control so that the statists can do what we want them to do.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, especially at the end. But I do think that, as we've talked about quite a bit during the discussion, I think the answer is yes, probably sometimes at least. But probably not much in this current context, because as Brother Lucas rightly said, there's a lot bigger things that we need to be focusing on, and this bleeding thing is not the bleeding that we're thinking it is.
Amen.
But we allow ourselves to be stirred up by the media reports, and even I do. I mean, I try to keep a level head about this kind of stuff, but when I do see 10,000 people crossing the Rio Grande, just kind of wading across, and then they're often, they jump on vehicles and at the interstate that's just nearby, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. But we've got to keep a godly perspective on these things and really think about things through the lens of Scripture and try to prioritize our efforts and really triage. But I do think that there are certain cases, like what Nehemiah encountered, when a credible threat occurs, and maybe you have a small nation, and infiltrators are about to engage in an act of violence, then I do think that it's a good idea sometimes to institute some questioning processes and possibly limit the damage.
All right, thank you, Alan and Luke, for a fascinating discussion. Let's give them a big round of applause. Out here.